Geneva, Switzerland, 1985. U.S. President Reagan and Soviet General Secretary Gorbachev meet during a tense period of the Cold War. It's their first summit and the first between any American and Soviet leaders in 6 years. While this renewed engagement at the highest levels was critical to the beginning of the end of the Cold War, another groundbreaking summit would occur just a month later. Led by two famous broadcast journalists, American and Soviet citizens would take part in people-to-people diplomacy via television. 25 years later, we take a look back. This week on Dialogue, a Citizens Summit Revisited. Hello again, and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. I'm John Molesky. Each week, Dialogue explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. Our guests today are legendary broadcasters Phil Donahue and Vladimir Pozner. Phil Donahue is a multiple Emmy Award-winning American television pioneer. His program, The Phil Donahue Show, had a 26-year run on national television and spawned the modern talk show genre. More recently, he hosted an MSNBC program in 2002 and 2003, and he is executive producer and co-director of the documentary Body of War. Vladimir Pozner is also an award-winning television host with multiple Soviet, Russian, and American trophies recognizing his work. He is currently the host of the Russian interview program Pozner. Previously, he served as president of the Russian Academy of Television and is the author of the 1990 bestseller Parting with Illusions, and Mr. Pozner joins us from Moscow. Gentlemen, welcome to Dialogue. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Let's start with your memories of the earliest time this project came up and got onto either of your radar screens. Phil, if we could start with you. When did this, whose idea was it? Where did it come from?
I was approached by a chap by the name of Ed Wurzbowski. Did I want to participate in a space bridge between American citizens and Soviet citizens? This was 1985, Soviet Union. Well, sure, who wouldn't want to do that? And who's on the other side? Vladimir Pozner. Okay, this is probably 84, we're planning this, and I'm thinking, Vladimir Pozner, and I know the name. He has already been on Nightline several times. He was the Russian who didn't sound Russian. He really, he baffled a lot of people, I think on both sides, because he was so skilled in English. And I thought, well, I'm thought of as a lefty anyway, but this'll kill me. I mean, I am going to participate in a Soviet-engineered public relations gesture, and people are going to laugh at me, and I'm going to be the fool who was sucked into this. So I called Vladimir. I called John. I called Ted Koppel. I said, when I called Ted Koppel, I said, what do you think of Vladimir Pozner? He said, I like him. So that was my first, okay, I'm on first base now. Then I'm worried about, they will cut what I say. So I extracted this promise. Everything I say, you will air, yes. You're not going to take anything I say away and out, no. So here we go. And we meet on the satellite. And we take off. And of course, I got to prove that I'm not in a public relations thing. So like 7 minutes into the thing, I said, why is Sakharov in Gorky? Why does it say Jew on your passport? Why do you have old men making decisions for you behind closed doors? Why do you allow this kind of autocratic, from the top down,
So why right out of the chute? Did you think you'd test it early on and find out?
I think we should ask Vladimir.
Vladimir, take us back to your earliest knowledge of the project and how it came up. And then also this notion of promising, Phil, that there would be no censorship. I read one interview with you where you say, well, I promised it, but I really couldn't guarantee it.
Not only could I not guarantee it, I just promised it because I wanted this to happen. There was no way I could make it happen, and I just said yes, yes, yes. But it all began with a man by the name of Joseph Golden, who's passed away, and who had a vision of the world where in all the big cities there'd be these huge television screens out in the public squares, and people in different countries could look at each other and communicate with each other, and he felt that that would kind of save the world, the possibility for average people to talk to each other. Now, if you look back on those days, it was a time of the evil empire. The Soviet Union and the United States had ceased all exchanges, cultural, athletic, scientific, political. There was nothing happening. The danger of war was very, very, very obvious. And there was a group of what you would call citizen diplomats on both sides, Soviets and Americans, who tried to figure out, what can we do? And Joseph said, well, why don't we try to communicate via television on a large screen? And that's where it all happened. When the Americans said, well, our guy would be Phil Donahue, I have to tell you, I didn't know who he was. Obviously, Donahue wasn't on Soviet television. I had not been in the United States for a great many years. I wasn't allowed out. So I didn't know what was going on there. Well, Phil Donahue, fine. And they chose me, the Soviet side chose me, because precisely they knew that in America I was relatively known. And I got this phone call one day from Phil Donahue, who said, I'm Phil Donahue, and so on. And he asked me those questions. And he said, can you guarantee? And I said, you bet. And you will not cut anything? I said, no way. But the really difficult thing was that he said, we have to pick the audience. And I said, well, why do you have to pick the audience? If we can't tell our audience, our public, our viewership, that we pick the people who are in the Soviet studio, they will say, those people have been picked by the KGB, you can't trust them, and so on and so forth. So I said, okay, fine, come pick the audience. I had no authority to say that, but I managed later to get the authorities to agree to this adventure, which it really was, of course.
Well, let's take a look at a clip. This has the open of the very first space bridge that you did, and then we'll see one of the questions.
Leningrad, USSR. Seattle, Washington, in the United States. Hosted in Seattle by Phil Donahue, and in Leningrad by Vladimir Pozner. These citizens from the Soviet city and these citizens from the U.S. city will talk by television satellite on a Citizens Summit. Participants are free to discuss whatever they wish. No subject will be off limits. They'll meet each other face to face next on a Citizens Summit.
Yes, sir. I would like for you to list 2 or 3 things that your government can do to ease the tension of nuclear war as steps to bring about peace in the world.
Yes, sir.
The first thing would be moratorium on nuclear testing. And the second thing would be a reduction of nuclear armaments on the whole, and then a reduction of all weaponry. What about your side?
What about our side?
Yes. I think that we're all in accord on those 3 particular items and why we have to do that. I think the problem is, how do we go about making sure we both do it at the same time?
Well, one thing I have to comment on is that 25 years later, this profession is good for the aging process, because you both look terrific.
Thank you.
Let me ask, the question of trust comes up in this exchange, as it did earlier when we were talking about Phil's first reaction to the project. Was this a typical theme throughout? Was there a difficulty building trust?
Oh, my.
How do we make sure? Yeah. Was this the main theme throughout?
You know, I can't speak for anyone else, and I'm not proud of, as I look back on, I was very anxious about this. This was exciting. Believe this, I wanted to do this. I mean, I got excited watching the opening there. I remember the rush. But, oh, man, I was also, you know, I mean, I was already getting mail about being a socialist, communist. I mean, what's happening here now in the States is very reminiscent of what was happening in '85. Gorbachev came to power in April of '85, and Donahue and Pozner were on the air on December 30th of that same year. So obviously, it was Gorbachev who opened this door. Tell him, Vlad, what he said about the 27th Congress.
You know, and I was watching now, I got goose pimples. It was such an amazing thing. And I have to tell you that it had an audience of about 150 to 200 million people in the Soviet Union. Of course, in those days, there was only really one channel to watch. But not only did the entire country watch it, but what was going on the screen was completely foreign to what most people had ever seen. Because here was Donahue saying, well, what about Gorky, and what about this, and what about that? And that, you know, nobody said those things in public. And so for us, I mean, for the people who did this, the Soviet side, there was a lot of apprehension. What would happen to us?
Why do you think
we could get killed for doing this kind of show? Finally, when it was taped, because it wasn't live, obviously, because of the time difference, there's an 11-hour time difference between Seattle and Moscow. When we taped it and we edited it out, and it was watched by the so-called general manager of Gosteleradyo, which was the state-run television outfit in the Soviet Union, and this guy had a poker face, and you could not guess what he was thinking. And it was only when it was all over that we learned. I mean, the people who were there with him, his aides or vice directors, they were very negative. They said, "Oh, this is not a good show. You got to be careful, and it should not be shown before the 27th Party Congress." Absolutely not. You know, it's not that kind of a show. And it was at that point that the director said, "Well, this is one of the wonderful television things, the most wonderful things I've seen. I congratulate you." I couldn't believe my ears. And it was only later that I learned that Gorbachev and Yakovlev, who was extremely important in Glasnost and Perestroika, had seen the show before it went on the air, had told the director of Gostel that this was the kind of television they wanted. So we were home free without knowing it. But it could have gone either way.
I'm curious, the timing. Why do you think that people were open to this happening at that moment? You talk about things like this never having been said on Soviet television, but the censors didn't pull the plug. They allowed it to go out.
Right.
Why?
Well, Gorbachev. Gorbachev was now in power. Would you say that was the #1 reason, Vlad?
That was the #1, the #2, the #3, the #4, and all the way down. That was the reason.
Right. And, you know, my choice probably a lot. First of all, the Donahue Show in '85 was hot. We were everywhere. But, you know, the more I think about it, I think I got the job by default. I don't think any network news guy would want this job.
Well, but you talked to your audiences. You had
I had that.
the
Yes,
experience to do
true.
what was needed.
That's true. But I don't see the network in 1985, and I could be wrong. The concern was so great. You know, I mean, McCarthy lived even then, and today, I think, you know, there was a real anxiety about it. You just couldn't, you know, was I pink? And that really did make me more anxious than it should have as I look back on it now. I mean, I might, you know, I'm afraid I was a bit of a wimp, but I was concerned.
Let's take a look at another clip, gentlemen. This is an example that shows that the audience was interested in more than the big issues. They wanted to just learn about each other. So let's take a look.
If we're only going to be talking about lofty political subjects, and those have already been discussed by the leaders of our countries, those have been discussed quite clearly, and I think positions have been stated perfectly accurately. If we do that, I think that it's going to be a kind of amateurish repetition of what professionals have already said. Maybe there are other topics we could discuss here, and then we'd really get to know each other better, and we'd get to understand each other better.
Might I inquire about your perceptions of Americans, not America as a political institution, but what do you feel about us? What do you think about us? What do you think about our lives?
This is of great interest to me because I was several times in the U.S. I must say that I really liked Americans. They're very open, they're very sociable, very straightforward. But I can tell you that there are some things that really astonished me. We were in Seattle, and there were such simple questions as, what Soviet films did you see? And people we spoke with couldn't tell us because we didn't see any. Now, could the Americans answer the question, why is there such a difference in the level of information available?
It's our belief that most of your information comes through your government is censored by your government. In our country, we have the right to read whatever we want. We can go into a store that specializes in foreign books and get them. The problem is that not all of our citizens want to read them. Your government puts on your news. Our government doesn't put on our news. It's privately produced. They can say anything they want.
Well, I would also like to ask why some of you seem to feel that you're so right and don't give us the benefit of the doubt.
Interesting challenge there. Was that typical of American audiences? Not as quick to give the benefit of the doubt?
Well, I think, you know, it's interesting. That woman stood up to say, let's talk about, you know, let's be friends, and she got an applause.
Right, let's not be pseudo-diplomats. Yeah. Let's be people.
Yeah, and Vladimir makes the point. They had never seen live people in this kind of crankiness, criticism. This had never been seen on Soviet television, and the camera panned the faces as somebody was complaining about something, probably me, and they were stunned. The Soviets looked at the camera, it looked as if to say, what is happening here? And Vladimir got, how many letters did you get, Vlad?
77,000 letters as a result of that exercise.
And tell them what they said about themselves.
Exactly, exactly. Well, there were two thoughts in those letters, two basic thoughts. One was, Comrade Pozner, where did you get those jerks in your audience? You should have invited people like me. I would have known what to say, which was kind of funny, but that was it. The second thought, which I thought was very important, was this. We saw our face in the mirror, and we didn't like it. And that was a very profound reaction to the comparison between the Americans, who were very outspoken, who clearly were not afraid to state their views, whether, you know, plus, minus, whatever, and the Soviets, who were kind of looking over their shoulders, because that's the way they'd lived all their lives, and there was no way that they were going to open up and criticize their own government. And I think that that was something that nobody could possibly ignore. And one more thing I wanted to point out. They really got kind of contentious, the two sides. They're yelling at each other. And at one point, a young man in Seattle, I remember him very well, a young guy, handsome, in a kind of a leather jacket. I think he was a fisherman. He got up and he said, you know, what are we doing? This is exactly what our governments want us to do. They want us to fight each other. Is that why we're on television today?
You remember this?
We have this opportunity to talk to each other. Well, let's talk to each other. And you know, it turned the show around 180 degrees. It was amazing the way people reacted to that. Some people on the Soviet side started crying, actually.
No, it was a very emotional experience. We really felt we were part of history. I felt very lucky. I was very, I mean, I couldn't figure this Pozner guy out. In the middle of the space bridge, of course, he's speaking Russian. In the middle of the space bridge, he's talking about something, and suddenly he says, why can't a woman be more like a man? And he's quoting Henry Higgins in English.
In perfect English.
In English.
Yes.
And of course, I was really upset about that. He made the monolingual, ugly American with the gray hair look far less capable. But I also admired Vladimir for the enthusiasm he brought to this. I mean, he really wanted those people to get up. And I saw that, because that's how I made my living. You know, it's hard. You know, people are scared. You got a microphone, a camera. It's terrifying. And to get them on their feet, it takes some work, and he
Especially
did.
Within this context of the Cold War.
And everybody with a headset and simultaneous translation. I don't know how we haven't blown up the world just by language difficulties.
You mentioned the My Fair Lady quote. Let's take a look. We have one more clip to look at today, and so I think it includes that moment.
Oh, does it?
I believe so.
May I ask you, Vladimir, how you feel about what has transpired here?
I have very complex feelings about what happened. I'm very pleased that it's happened. But what happened has indicated, very precisely, I think, how difficult it is for us to talk with each other. I don't want to sound flippant, but in the musical My Fair Lady, there is a refrain when Higgins is amazed at Lisa says,
why can't a woman be more like a man?
why can't a woman be more like a man? And he's very concerned about this. I think that sometimes we are demanding, we're asking each other, why aren't we more like each other? Why don't you act the same way as we do? This is not right. And today, I think that if we've at least understood this on both sides, that we are in fact different, that each of us has its own viewpoint, and that it's worth something, this will be a first step, albeit a trembling one, but a first step towards understanding. And when we understand, then we will no longer be afraid of each other. There'll be no paranoia. There'll be normal conversation. First and foremost, we have to understand. This is my feeling about today's meeting.
You know, when I was preparing to speak with both of you today, the Murrow quote about lights in a box kept coming into my head. So I looked it up, and, you know, I know everyone knows it, it's classic, but just to get it right, this instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and it can even inspire, but it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's merely wires and lights in a box. I think what we saw in 1985, you made this more than lights and wires in a box. Where does it fit for you in your career? You both have ongoing careers, illustrious careers. Where does it fit for you?
Well, this is definitely a chapter. This was a blessing for me. I mean, not only, we went to the Donahue Show went to Russia, Soviet Union, in '86, after we did the space bridges. We had Russian crew, television, a lot of Heineken, and a plane. We did Irkutsk. A woman came up to me, I'll never forget it, in Omsk. I'm downtown Omsk, and a lady, a senior woman came up and said, Phil, space bridge. And I thought, man, I'm an international star. That was fun anyway. Yeah. So, you know, for both of us, and a friendship that exists today,
that's
and
clear,
we've seen a lot of each other since, and I'm just I'm just impressed with Vladimir's brain. He's a really smart guy with a lot of current information, and I ought to know because I've been on the air with him, and he is, I'll tell you what, he knows what he's talking about. I'm impressed.
Vladimir, in placing this in your career, one thing I want to ask you about is you were once a government propagandist, essentially, and you've written and talked about that. And then to go from that role to building this bridge during this most difficult time, an amazing turn of events for you.
Yes, an amazing turn of events for me, and certainly if we speak about careers, my career was launched by that particular space bridge because I had worked for the equivalent of the Voice of America, but in the Soviet Union, called Moscow Radio, broadcasting shortwave to the United States, a propaganda exercise, as I've said many times. I'd never been able to really express myself due to where I was living, and here I had this, but even in this exchange, I was still, how should I put this, I was still kind of protecting the Soviet Union and trying to prove that it wasn't all bad and so on and so forth. But the fact that I was seen by so many people simultaneously who'd never seen me before in the Soviet Union, just overnight I became this very spoken about and famous person. Thank God that that Gorbachev was there and things changed rapidly. And I was able to become a journalist. And one of the things that certainly helped me was Phil, whom I watched, from whom I learned a lot. And of course, the 6 years that he and I worked together in New York City doing a show called Pozner and Donahue. Incidentally, when I asked him, why is it called Pozner and Donahue instead of Donahue and Pozner? After all, you're the famous guy. He said, well, if it bombs, that'd be Pozner and Donahue. So anyway, working with Phil, you know, it just taught me a whole lot about who I was and what I wanted really to do. So the fact that we were brought together, to me, is probably one of the most important things that ever happened to me.
Vladimir was, you were in the Soviet Union without interruption for how long, Vlad?
38 years.
So that was 38 years without, and no travel permission outside the Soviet Union. And suddenly it happens. He lands at JFK in New York, and he comes right to the Donahue Show. I mean, you must have still had jet lag. Our first and a studio audience, 8th floor, 30 Rock, Rockefeller Center. Here he is, a real live commie. And I mean, I couldn't get to them fast enough in the audience. Every other hand was in the air. And, you know, then we went and had a beer, and a friendship developed, and we've enjoyed each other's company since.
Very short on time. A quick final thought from each of you. And about this, fast forward to today, we still perceive each other largely through media. There are more outlets now with the introduction of the internet. But how are we doing now? Are we...
Vlad?
We're not doing well at all. I think media on both sides live in the past, go back to Cold War views, or don't think about what's happening, but rather just rely on old information. I think that media could be a much more effective way of communicating, and I think what we did with Phil back then could serve as an example of how you go about helping people understand each other, not even necessarily being friends, but just understanding. I think media on both sides is doing a very poor job.
About 20 seconds for a final thought, Phil.
Well, it's no longer the evil empire. The drama has disappeared from the Cold War. And I'm afraid Americans aren't really altogether that pumped up. I mean, we just had a conference with that's another thing. We can't pronounce your presidency, Medvedev. And it didn't get a lot of it. It didn't get a lot of attention. Reducing nukes to 1,500 on either side got very little attention. We're no longer afraid of Russia, so we're no longer really curious about it.
Well, in an odd way, that is a positive note to end on. At least we're not afraid of each other.
Yeah, they were more interested.
Work to be done.
They were more interested in us during these space bridges and during our visits there than we were in them.
Chronic American problem, just not a lot of interest in foreign affairs. Thank you, gentlemen. I wish we had more time. And to those of you watching on MHZ or listening on radio, we appreciate your comments and encourage you to share them with us. And you can do so by sending email to dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. Not the 77,000 you sent Vladimir Pozner, but please send us something. We'll return next week with another edition of Dialogue. Until then, for all of us at the Wilson Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for watching.
Dialogue is a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHZ Networks. Dialogue is available via broadcast, cable, satellite, and telco on MHZ Worldview throughout the United States. To see how to watch where you live, visit www.mhznetworks.org.